Welcome to It's Beyond the Food podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Dozier, non-diet nutritionist and founder of the Non-Diet Coaching Certification. This is Beyond GLP-1, the Expert Series. I created this series of podcast episodes because informed consent required the full picture, not just the press release. So over the next several episodes, I'm bringing in experts to cover every angle: science, marketing, side effect, impact on body image, nutrition, health, counseling, and what all this means for you and your client. Whatever you are, a health professional navigating these conversations in your practice or someone personally researching your decision, this series is for you. Ready? Let's do this. Hey, quick heads up before we patch in the interview. I wanted to let you know that during the production process of this podcast episode, we realized that I had a quality sound issue during the moment of recording as the interviewer. However, in the spirit of unperfectionism, I decided to release the podcast episode with the amazing Louise with a lower quality standard on my behalf than usual. And we'll be back on the next episode with the same high quality sound as we had usually. Ready? Let's do this unperfectly. Welcome to It's Beyond the Food podcast. I'm Stephanie Dozier and I'm your host. And today we have a guest. Her name is Louise Adams. She is a size-inclusive clinical psychologist in private practice and Flourish, Kirribilli in Sydney, Australia. I hope I said that right. And she's also the founder of Untrap, an online academy. And she's also the co-author of the Non-Diet Approach Guidebook for Psychologists and Counselor with Dr. Fiona Wellner. And today she is here to talk to us about a paper that she recently published. I think it's been 2 months. No, 2 weeks now.
Very only a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's fresh off the press. And it's GLP-1 medication for weight loss, a triumph of marketing over patient care. And I'm going to have the paper link in the show notes. But I'm going to get started with Louise. So welcome to the podcast, Louise.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's lovely to meet Louise. We've been around the same group of people, but we actually never met. Yes. This is our first encounter. Yes. Which I'm sure won't be the last one.
I hope not. It is really lovely to meet you.
And talk to us about your paper. What is the overview of it? How did you get to write that paper? And we'll get into the details of it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it just came out a couple of weeks ago. And I guess, everyone is sort of living through the era of just this avalanche of information about the GLP-1 drugs, both for diabetes treatment, but mostly, let's face it, for weight loss. And there's a lot of papers written about it, a lot of media on it, but there's not a lot of critical lens, let's face it. And the reason that what we wanted to add with this paper is like bringing together kind of what is the actual information in terms of the clinical trial, like what's the science actually telling us about not just the weight loss impact, but the side effects, the real kind of world impact on weight cycling, which has definitely not been spoken about a lot. Some of the issues to do with tolerance, but also kind of contextualizing all of the science through a critical lens against, the marketing of this is astonishing, remarkable, like what we've always known that Big Pharma are really on, creating diseases, right? And pushing diseases as well as, selling the cure, quote unquote. But this is like on the next level. And that's, probably for the last 10 years, I've been looking at particularly Novo Nordisk's impact on the marketing of obesity and just sort of seeing the astronomical octopus-like influence over how we perceive body size and the medical treatment of it. So we want to kind of put it all in one paper So, Reagan and Angela are fantastic at collecting the receipts and analyzing the data and, going into those clinical trials and what we do and don't know. And I kind of came in on my, look at this, with the marketing efforts of it. And it's been like, it came out, I think, in the first week in April. And this paper has had 7,500 views so far.
And
So,
we're recording this for everybody on April the 17th.
yes.
So it's 2 weeks, call it 2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah. 10 days. It's 10 days, and I've not seen an academic paper attract that kind of attention. So I think that people really are interested in a more broader overview of this from people who don't have any industry payments and collaborations.
And have you seen people from not from our niche, right? We're from the non-diet, anti-diet land, but have you seen a lot of feedback from people that are within the, call it the medicine world?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a clinical psychologist, so I hang out in a lot of health professional spaces and, ranging from really awesome weight inclusive types to sort of sitting on the fence types to some really crunchy people. And there is definite interest from all, and I think that's awesome, right? Because the main kind of push from this and like from all of us who wrote the paper is that informed consent is extremely important. And informed consent means you really need to be aware of all of the issues. You as an individual need to kind of make your own decision about what to do with your own body, for example, or if you're a health professional and you're prescribing, you want to make decisions ethically about what's going on based on that. But we really are lacking informed consent. So I'm really glad that this is hopefully something people can use practically.
Yeah, and this is something that we have been talking about. Like I've had a number of guests on the podcast talking about the issue, but it's never been through a formal communication stream like a paper.
Yeah.
It's like in between us conversations. So thank you very much for putting that eloquently on a paper. So we're going to dive into this because I have Reagan coming on an upcoming episode. I don't know if it's going to be the next one to this in the recording process. I really want to take a dive into your lens on it, which is the marketing. And you have a kind of a statement that I want to get us started with. And you say, the line between marketing and science has been erased with GLP-1 company. Can you take us from there, from that perspective?
Yes. I mean, when we're selling a product, that's one thing. When we're researching an idea or a medical intervention, that's a different thing. But it has been almost completely blurred because a lot of the scientists, not even blurred, let's face it, it's kind of like all of the researchers that are producing these papers are so in the pocket of the weight loss companies that are producing the drugs that you have to ask yourself the question, how much scientific knowledge is actually being funneled through the acceptability from the pharma company. And we know that that's happened, particularly when it comes to weight loss drugs. Back in 2015, when Novo Nordisk were getting ready to Saxenda, which was the first version of their weight loss drugs, was on the market, they were getting ready to push the semaglutide as a diabetes drug first and then second, launching it for weight loss. So in 2015, in Australia, at an obesity conference, I'm so sorry for using the word, a representative from Novo did a PowerPoint presentation actually outlining their marketing plans for, and it's astonishing to look at that PowerPoint from 11 years ago and see the entire kind of map of what is happening. So there was a three-pronged plan from Novo at the time. The first one was to create what they called legitimacy and urgency for the medical management of obesity. And the key ideas there were to establish obesity as a disease and to use weight stigma as a kind of lever to encourage people to medically manage obesity. So they, as part of that, they wanted to actually generate and disseminate evidence about this. So whenever you say generate evidence, from
That is like a 5 alarm system should be going on, right?
that's a really interesting turn of phrase. And that's honestly what's been happening kind of ever since then. The second prong in their strategy was to, what they said, grow and evolve the medical management of obesity. And that included introducing specialty medicine and educating health professionals and researchers in these ideas. And they've established something called the American Board of Obesity Medicine. This is an education hub which certifies people in their ideas about obesity. And it's gone from something, I was checking just before I came on, in 2013, I think there was like 500 physicians and researchers in the United States who are certified, and there's more than 10,000 now. So,
Well,
yeah,
from 500 to 10,000 in 10 years.
yeah, a little over 10 years. So, yeah, it's a beautifully efficient ecosystem of funneling the same ideas that it is a disease that requires chronic medical management, and here's our drugs. So, and then educate. So it starts to sound like an echo chamber. It starts to sound like a marketing message, and it's very homogenous. So, we are hearing the same ideas about higher body weight being a disease, that weight stigma is bad because it gets in the way of treating this disease. We're hearing it all over the world. It is like a franchise. It's like a kind of McDonald's franchise, except instead of selling burgers and chips, they're selling, this is the disease, here is the treatment.
So you said 2 prong. What was the third prong?
Oh, the third, my favorite, access to care, right? So this is where the money comes in. So this is influencing policy and legislation to increase governments and insurance companies paying for these drugs. So this is where,
Lobbying, in a way.
yeah, this is where we see, particularly in the United States, the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, which is tried desperately to overturn the ban on weight loss drugs under Medicare, which that came into place after the fen-phen scandal, which killed a lot of people in the 90s. And after that, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes with dodgy pharmaceutical companies influencing the narrative again and pushing the urgency. And at the time, people had had enough because people weren't getting much thinner. In fact, they were just dying. So people stopped being able to use government, particularly Medicare, to sell weight loss drugs. So there's been massive efforts, since the 2010s to overturn that. And Novo have been, front and centre of funding that and putting lobbyists into Washington. But unfortunately, they have been successful in parts, so that they've nudged and nudged and nudged. And now, there are aspects of Medicare that weight loss drugs are now back on. So the gates are being pushed open. So, and that's happening globally as well. Like we're seeing here in Australia, industry-funded patient groups, industry-funded obesity groups going off to our pharmaceutical benefits people and to our health ministers and really pushing to have weight loss drugs put on public purses. And all of this is about ensuring as much money as possible gets back into the pocket of the weight loss drug companies.
I saw, because I was preparing myself for the interview, and I was snooping through your LinkedIn profile, and I was seeing that the Australian government is doing a open general assembly, I guess, on this particular topic. Are you seeing that stemming from that business plan that GLP-1 was creating in
Absolutely.
2000? Yeah.
Absolutely connected. So that, 2015 chat from Novo Nordisk it happened at Obesity Week. It happened, I think it was the ANZOS conference. Novo was sponsoring the ANZOS conference. They were sponsoring Diabetes Australia at the time. They sponsored the obesity organisations that were supporting all this kind of stuff. So the through is really, really apparent. And actually, I'm just kind of coming to the end of writing a really comprehensive overview of what happened in Australia. So, yeah, absolutely. This has been inextricably tied to the efforts to get them on the system. In fact, the Weight Issues Network, which is here in Australia, one of the Novo funded and trained patient groups, went to the PBAC, which is a pharmaceutical board, who make the decisions about whether or not this is going to get put on the public purse, for a private meeting with these representatives. And, they're all media trained by people in Obesity Canada. Obesity Canada is funded by
I
Novo
was reading
Nordisk.
that
Yeah.
in your paper. Like I was reading the paper that I was learning things about my own country I didn't know. Like they were in bed with Obesity Canada to rewrite the guideline of clinical obesity.
Yes, yes. So that was an earlier
They were
paper that we wrote.
sponsoring
Yeah.
Obesity Canada while they were rewriting the clinical obesity guideline, which now makes me think about the Lancet paper that came out last year. Was it
So,
part of that massive business plan from Novo Nordisk from 10 years ago as well?
well, absolutely. I mean, the specifics of like, let's do a Lancet consensus paper wasn't written down, but these efforts to legitimize and sell the ideas. So the Lancet paper on clinical obesity was, I know, Rubino, who was in charge of that, is really heavily funded by Novo. I think 46 of 56 authors in the Lancet have been sponsored by Novo or associated companies. The launch of the Lancet paper began in London with a video message from Ted Cassidy. I think it's Ted Cassidy, one of the main politicians who's pushing for the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act. And he's thanking the Lancet authors for producing the Lancet paper, which he says is going to be extremely helpful in his efforts in Washington to get these drugs paid for by the government. So it's kind of shameless what is happening, and the enormity of it is just kind of staggering.
Given that it's not my field, is this the same pattern in other disease pharmaceutical contexts, like take diabetes, for an example? In other area of diabetes, is it the same type of embedment between the two and so public and no shame around it? Or is it unique to the GLP-1 weight loss?
It's certainly not unique. It is, pharma, being in bed with research isn't anything new. Diabetes is a really good example because absolutely, Novo's playbook of what they're doing now has been, practiced in the diabetes field, and they have, examples of questionable influence going back to they're called sort of the designer insulins. So, Novo and Eli Lilly have been in this kind of heated rivalry kind of style, but also kind of in lockstep with each other, protecting the profits for many, many years. So, being in bed with the Diabetes Association, being friends and having friends in Washington, paying lobbying groups to, expand definitions, to produce guidelines that are sort of friendly. This isn't new, but I think what's different is the scale, because, diabetes is a disease, Having a larger body is not a disease. So what the difference is, it's like they're expanding the market beyond diabetes, using the same drugs by diseasifying a population of people pretty much based on BMI, even though the Lancet paper on clinical obesity was pushing to kind of, at one level saying the BMI really is not very useful and we should toss it out. But instead of tossing it out, they say, let's add more measures so we can expand again. With the Lancet definition of clinical obesity, more people can be diagnosed as unwell and more people can get access to GLP-1 weight loss drugs.
The scope, and you say that in the paper, and I don't have the quote here, but you say something to the effect that we don't clearly understand the full scope of it. But one thing is for sure is that our governmental body and the individual will be bearing the cost.
Yeah, absolutely. The scope is, I think we said in the paper, it was beyond our capability to fully scope out all of the countries. So we've looked at Canada, we've looked at the United States, we've looked at Britain, we've looked at Denmark, we've looked at Australia. But this is happening on a level, and it's not like there's any ready way to find this out. You have to have sort of the dogged, curious interest like we do. And a persistence, and I guess maybe a critical lens, that because I think that there is an enormous amount of trust in pharmaceutical companies, even though, people make jokes about them and things like that. There's this respect for medicine. It's like scientists wouldn't do this, companies, wouldn't really be this kind of underhanded when it comes to marketing, and, they actually are and do it repeatedly again and again.
Have you had the opportunity to speak to some of those researchers or academics who were bought in or paid through the industry? And what is their perspective? Do they believe that they're being bought out, or they're doing it for the cause? In their words.
Yeah, really, really good question. Famously, they tend not to respond to my emails. But it runs the gamut. But often what you say, and you read this in, when journalists ask them about the conflicts of interest. So Donna Ryan is one of them. I call her $1 Million Donna because she's been paid over $1 million by Novo Nordisk alone for all of this international travel and consulting fees. And she was one of the main salespersons for the cardiovascular stuff. But when she's directly asked about it, she will die on the hill of this money that I'm getting from the company is irrelevant because I really believe this. And, we hear that time and time again, but it's not really about whether or not they believe it. There's the reasons for having rules about conflict of interests, for example, and saying at least declare them publicly, is because we need to take that in as we're making our decision about informed consent as to whether or not the bias in this person could be influencing what I'm hearing. So I think that, that profession that, look, it's not influencing me at all. I'm just, I happen to be taking money, or my faculty is taking money on behalf of something that I truly believe in. There's no problem here. I think we need to be honest that is a problem, and that's why we have rules about conflict of interest. And we desperately need a separation between what's acceptable and, what is, essentially Donna Ryan is, at the very least, a highly paid consultant for Novo Nordisk. We keep pretending that she is a retired academic, but she's essentially employed by Novo. And that's what I'm saying about this, the line between science and marketing is erased, because essentially a lot of the obesity researchers, salespersons now, sales reps for Novo. If you're taking that much money, you are a salesperson for that company.
And if borderline, it is legal to be a researcher and a highly paid consultant in majority for one pharmaceutical company?
Yeah, Yeah, it is legal. Ethically, it's questionable. But
Ethically is like, yeah,
yeah,
but
but I mean,
illegal.
yeah, it's not illegal. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So when we say that the lines are blurred, is that people use their credential, use their credibility, and unknown to them or known to them, they're playing out their internalized anti-fatness by looking, interpreting the information, the data from the research to spin it in a way that is positive for the pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And often we won't even know, the extent of like the training that has happened behind the scenes. So, for example, in Obesity Canada, which used to be called the Canadian Obesity Network, or CON, which is one of my favorite acronyms, but they're now called Obesity Canada. Back when they were a CON, they began recruiting patients. So these are people who had, undergone various weight loss procedures, brought them together, and essentially media trained them using Novo Nordisk funding. So there is a really interesting video that I came across from ESO in 2018. ESO is the European Association for the Study of Obesity. It's like a yet another Novo Nordisk funded organisation. So they had their conference in 2018. They were running a workshop. Obesity Canada were there with some European patients, and they were sort of media training them and telling them how they did it in Canada. And there's a very unsettling part of that video where Femina, who is one of the trainers, is saying to the people in the room, everyone in Canada, one of our people being interviewed by the media in Canada will repeat the messages, obesity is a disease, no matter what the question is that the journalist is asking. That's how good they are at media training. And that's what you guys can do. It's so bold.
Mind blowing.
Yeah.
For those looking at my face right now, I think my face says it all. It's like, when you were saying that, the first image that came to my mind is Oprah.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Right. That's, as you were saying that, I know you were talking about the obesity group in Canada, but what I'm seeing is Oprah pounding that message for about 2 years up to last year, pounding that message over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's a little, it was unsettlingly familiar messaging, wasn't it? I agree. And she's done a couple of TV specials. Here in Australia, it's actually hard for us to watch those, but thanks to Reagan, I have managed to look at it. Everyone in her first TV special had been, sponsored. All of the doctors that were on the stage had been heavily sponsored by Novo Nordisk. All of the main messages came out of Oprah. Oprah's incredibly polished and powerful media voice. She stepped away from Weight Watchers.
Yeah.
And, of course, Oprah doesn't have to disclose what shares she is invested in. But, you don't have to be a genius and look at Oprah's track record. She will go where the wind is blowing in terms of, what's on point. And her disclosure, her eventual disclosure that she was on the GLP-1, was... And then she came to Australia recently and did a countrywide tour of this country, A Night with Oprah. It was sponsored by Eli Lilly. So we now know which company's drug she is taking. And she talked about, I didn't go because I'm still grieving the loss of Oprah, the deep disappointment. But I was sort of lurking on social media and, obviously, everyone in Australia loves Oprah just as much as everyone in America loves Oprah. But there was just this kind of air of confusion from some of the comments in the social media group saying, I really wanted to see you, Oprah. I had a really lovely time seeing you. But, all of that talk about your disease, it just was a bit odd. So in Australia, you're not allowed to do direct to consumer marketing the way you are in America. But, the kind of subtle way Oprah was talking about her latest journey and the treatment for her disease and the reduction in stigma and her despair and how much stigma there is that people don't believe obesity is a disease. So she's completely on point with those messages. So it is not just obesity researchers, it's not just the universities, it's not just the patient groups, it's also celebrities. And, that's what I mean about the enormity, the avalanche of this. It is absolutely relentless and everywhere.
In the academic world, researchers, there's a disclosure obligation. But in the media, if we take Oprah, there's no disclosure. So she has never gone public to say that she has share in a particular company. You haven't found any evidence, but we have to use our critical thinking as consumer to see it true.
Yeah, well, people go where the profits are. And
it's like Serena Williams.
Yes.
Can we talk about like Serena Williams? She's a disclosed evidence because her husband owns the company. For anybody listening was like, why is she talking about Serena Williams? If you don't know, she's on a GLP-1 and using her journey, her body to sell Roe, which is one in America. I think it's a compounding company in America. And her husband is part owner of the company. She's using herself as the poster child of it.
Yep, it's everywhere. Everyone is cashing in. And yeah, it is harder in the media to figure out who's exactly benefiting.
So when you speak about informed consent, can you tell us more about that?
Well,
because that's the whole point of doing this paper, right? Is to help change the concept of informed consent.
Absolutely. I think it's necessary. So informed consent means being aware of both the pros and the cons, short and long term, the evidence, the potential consequences, and then being able to make an informed decision. You cannot make an informed decision without knowing all of the facts, right? So that's why we wanted to put all of the facts, including the marketing, into one place so people can hopefully use it in their informed consent process. So informed consent is a bit different if you are a consumer, if you're a human. Informed consent can differ according to what you want to use the drug for. Like if you are using it for diabetes, your informed consent is going to look totally different. If you're using it for weight loss alone, there's a whole different set of things that you need to know about. If you're a health professional working in the field, like everyone's a bit different in terms of the context of how they're coming at this. But knowing the ins and outs, what we've put here is a really broad background of the science, the marketing, where we are, the risks that we need to, and informed consent needs to come from people who aren't paid by the companies that are selling the drug.
So what would it look like for a health professional? But we'll go down a two paths. Health professional, informed consent. And I can share, once you walk us through it, I'll share how I practice my informed consent as a professional. And then we'll go down the path of population. Is that good for you?
Sounds good.
How is a health professional ethically go through the process of informed consent on their own?
Oh, yes. Well, I guess, as health professionals, a lot of us do continued professional development, right? So trying to keep up with things that are happening in our field. And the big one here is, where are you getting your education from? Who is sponsoring, for example, the modules or the seminar that you're going to, or the paper that you're looking at? So you need to seek out people who aren't paid off by someone. And honestly, oh my gosh, it is almost impossible. And it's like informed consent is a lovely idea, but that's why we wrote this paper. We need better science, right? Because I mean, there's so many factors that go into why science is getting difficult, why academics is getting difficult. But we do need to keep in mind that we need objective sources of information and education. So informed consent would be seeking out unbiased stuff, looking not just at the short-term stuff, particularly when we're looking at size and weight, not just looking at anything. Like what we need is like 5 years plus in terms of like what are the pros and cons. Yeah, informed consent needs to be short-term and long-term, because we don't just live for like 1 year after taking a drug. We live for that the entirety of our lives, and we need to kind of look at what we know about that. And if that's not much, because that's the case at the moment, then we need to factor that in to the informed consent. I think as a health professional too, and this whole climate is really making us all look quite carefully at, like, ethically, where do we sit? What are the ethics? You know, when it boils down to it, medicine is first, do no harm. And that's why I'm a big advocate of weight inclusive approaches, because, you know, efficacy in terms of health improvements or changes in weight really doesn't differ very much between weight inclusive and weight focused approaches when you kind of really look at it. But the harm, the risk, that's where things really start looking quite different, because we don't tend to do harm in terms of weight inclusion, whereas the side effects for long-term weight loss drugs are significant and need to be kind of considered carefully. So you as a health professional, look at ethically, where do you sit with first, do no harm. Ethically, could you look at a weight inclusive perspective as an alternative to where we are right now? Right, because informed consent, with this like massive barrage of the narrative of like being in a larger body, having a larger body or a waist circumference or something like that is a disease that needs medical treatment, seeing that that's actually just a perspective. That's not the only perspective. That is something that's ethically not apparent anywhere. That troubles me. You know, that this narrative of like there is no alternative, or like if you're not focusing on weight loss or trying to get your weight down, that you're not taking care of your health. Weight inclusivity is a valid alternative. It's not a do nothing. It's an active way, as you know, of taking care of your health. It's just not being weight focused. So yeah, be careful of where you're getting your education. Look at your ethics. Remember, first, do no harm. Look at alternatives. Like, what are the alternatives? And then run through your list, pros and cons, short term, long term, for the person in front of you. And that, it's okay. Like I'm seeing as a weight inclusive person, like more people referring on and saying, actually, I think I do want to go off and like see a weight focused practitioner. That's okay. Like it's okay it doesn't feel good for us as practitioners, but like, this is the world we're living in.
That's your body.
That's right. But it's also like us as health professionals. It's like, I actually ethically need to sit here and don't want to kind of, adapt or change, or, you know what I mean? Doing things that just don't fit us. Just the same. Yeah. But it's all about informed consent.
I'll layer two things if you can, and you tell me what you think. Number one, what I've learned over the years is this. When I'm in the process of forming an opinion about something, is to seek out lived experience people.
Ah, yes.
Right? Lived experience, if we're talking about GLP-1, lived experience is people who live in fat bodies. Go and listen. Go and listen to their perspective. Go and learn from their perspective. Specifically, if you're not a person who has lived in a fat body. So for me, the lens of lived experience has taught me a lot over the years and allowed me to look at my own bias, no matter what the situation might be. Because that would be the second thing for me. Understand how your human brain functions. That's my zone. Let me talk about mindset and brain, but understand how your human brain functions and understand the concept of bias and how in your unknown bias be creeping into your analysis.
Such a good point. Thank you for reminding me of the importance of weight stigma and learning about that from lived experience. And my, again, warning would be make sure the lived experience is not actually an AstroTurf patient organisation that's been trained
No,
by
no, a
pharma.
human being. Not trained by pharma. Or not trained by pharma.
And it's just horrible, that we have to sort of consider like the infection of patient advocacy organisations in this, but they sponsor between 1 and 5 patient groups in every single country in 80 countries across the world. Wow. So the majority of patient organisations are going to be people who have, been given these messages. So lived experience means, actual human, no ties to companies. In Australia, we have Size Inclusive Health Australia, which is a weight inclusive organisation connected to all kinds of awesome people with lived experience that have not been media trained by pharma. And then there's, of course, ASDA in the United States. There's NAFA in the United States. There's Awesome, the Association for Sizing. Oh, God. Thank you. The acronyms.
ASWIM.
ASWIM. Awesome. That's what I call them. They are awesome. So, yeah. But also just being aware of the labour too, of people with lived experience have lived experience. So it's traumatising to talk about, hey, how hard has it been, and what do you think? Because everyone is, in my little world, is just feeling really exhausted and really, everyone wants to talk about GLP-1s, or, people are feeling kind of on the defensive of why aren't you taking it, or the kind of whole people grappling in the weight inclusive world with like, what does this mean now that we actually have something that quote unquote works, at least, for a little while, and at least marginally more efficiently than stuff that's happened in the past. So there's a lot going on. And just be aware of like the wear and tear of where we're at.
Yeah. And my ace in my pocket is your co-author. If you are not yet subscribed to Reagan Chaston's Substack, this is the place where you go to get the other side of the coin. Right? I'll read the study being published, and then I'll wait for Reagan to come out with her analysis of it. Now I've got 2 different perspectives, so I can form my own opinion.
Yeah, I can't rate her highly enough. Like national treasure. Yeah, absolutely.
And pay her $8 a month. Like it's more than worth it.
She's a bargain. Absolutely.
Now, if we are listening to this podcast and we are general population, I think we've learned from everything we said to the professional, but where do we go as a person looking into this?
Yeah, well, again, like as a person looking into this, also sign up to Reagan, because she writes in plain English and sort of translates like lofty science into like human-sized bites, which I adore. So it's for you too. But informed consent again, and this goes like who's in your team in terms of health, making sure that you feel safe with your team in terms of industry connections. I mean, sometimes it's impossible, right? If you have particularly endocrinologists are one of the most in the pocket professions of all the professions. So it is really hard to find an endocrinologist that doesn't have a conflict of interest. But if you can find people like through networks like we're talking about today that you feel safe with, that's very important. But one of my most powerful go-tos as a clinical psychologist, like working with people, is if you are making a really big decision, you do a pros and cons list, right? And you do short-term versus long-term. Short-term is like 6 months and less. Long-term is 6 months and longer. And then you go positives and negatives. So it's like, it ends up being a square kind of thing. And then you fill in the blanks for you with your lived experience, with the knowledge that you're kind of gathering. And I want you to kind of give twice the weight to not industry sources to
twice the weight. No pun intended.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. We want to put an asterisk next to like, or like flashing red flag to like Oprah said this, but or Dr. Oz, people who are kind of profiting, but really kind of drill down on, what would be positive about this? What would be negative about this? There might be some stuff that, is ambivalent or kind of in the middle, in the short term and in the long term. And I guess the big thing that it's even in the Lancet paper when they're talking about like why being bigger is a disease, which I'm using air quotes, is weight cycling, right? So weight cycling has been like, since the invention of dieting, we've created weight cycling, because when we intentionally restrict our food, or even unintentionally, when we don't have enough food and our fat cells start to shrink, our body notices and it kind of panics. It loses what we call homeostasis, like it loses its sense of safety, and it activates all of this unconscious stuff, which is designed to get our bodies back to where they were at the beginning. And that is really good for survival. It's kind of like, making a conscious choice to hold our breath, we can do, but at some point our body's just going to take over and make us breathe. So that's kind of like weight cycling, is like we can kind of white knuckle a diet for a little bit of time. Depending on genetics, age, a million other factors, will be, more or less quote unquote successful. But after a few months, the rebound will begin. And that's just science. That's just physiology of what happens when we're attempting to kind of reduce our weight. So that's the problem that the weight loss industry has faced since the 1950s. And that's also why it's been so incredibly profitable, because nothing is more awesome than to have like a repeat customer.
Nothing is more profitable than a diet who doesn't work.
Exactly. And blaming the customer.
We're not going to go into the science. We'll do that with Reagan when she's on. But the weight cycling effects you're describing very eloquently right now is exactly what we're seeing with GLP-1.
It's no
The
different.
weight cycling and the weight regain is there even with the medication or calorie restriction.
Absolutely.
This body of ours is fighting to come back.
Yes.
No matter what you use.
Yeah. It's a very good point. It is not a cure for being in a larger body. It's a weight suppression tool that has a ricochet effect when people come off, and even as the studies fail to kind of follow people for long enough, but even while people are still taking them, there's kind of like this rebound effect. So we need to take weight cycling into account when you're doing your pros and cons list, because the companies and the conclusions from the researchers is that because it's a disease, it's just that you have to stay on it forever because you're disease. Really what that means is that this is suppression, and so you have to stay on it forever in order to continue that suppression. So the problem is that when lots of people can't stay on it forever, it's very expensive. I think it gets boring for people because GLP-1s do impact on our pleasure centers, and there's a real anhedonia, like a kind of blunting of pleasure and joy. So I think that is kind of factoring into people's decisions to stop taking them as well. But so weight cycling is an important part of this, because it's not simply the weight rebound that happens, but all of the things that they blame on larger bodies actually happens from weight cycling. So inflammation, insulin problems, cardiovascular risk, all of that is related to weight cycling. So every time we make a decision to weight suppress, we are risking that weight cycling stuff. Okay, and that can happen at any size. Weight cycling isn't great at any size. So we need to factor in weight cycling and just be aware that what we're living through in this age isn't a permanent, safe, like our body's homeostasis is like, I'm fine, I'm reset and I'm happy. It's actually, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm suppressed, and there's going to be a kind of, on the other end, an impact. Yeah, it's a really hard one to grapple with. There might be reasons in your own personal pros and cons list where that kind of thing on balance means, I feel okay about this too. But people are not being told this. In the UK, when Novo Nordisk snaffled their way into getting the drugs into the NHS through some hugely outrageous lobbying, they have approved it only for 2 years. And so people are being sentenced to a 2-year, here's your free weight loss drugs. At the end of 2 years, they are sentencing them to weight cycling impacts. And so this is why we really need to think about what we're doing. Like, I don't think we're seeing, a globe full of people who are kind of magically transformed from one weight to another. We're going to see the same weight cycling problems. And, the more pushback there is, so the more weight you lose, and then the ricochet is higher, particularly with cardiovascular. This is concerning. So, the lobbying was so successful because if governments in the UK really understood the science, they should have said, we'll put people on it forever. But no one can afford that. No government can afford that. So we're just in this really, like, the only thing I could clearly see in terms of benefit is for the bottom line of these companies.
Yeah. I'll add one more piece. And this is good for practitioner and population, is the Association for Weight Inclusive Medical Students has created a layman's term PDF, a informed consent document. I'm going to put it in the show notes. It's dated of 2023, but I spoke to Reagan and they're updating it right now as we speak.
Fantastic.
I don't know if you're part of the group, but there's a group of people updating it right now, and it's going to be republished anytime now, updated with the most recent research. And it outlines with statistic, research, graphic, visual, everything you spoke about right now.
I recommend to all my clients, is like, go and look at that, use that when you're doing your pros and cons list. There's also associated with that is the Hayes Health Sheets, which is another resource that the magic of Reagan and the Weight Inclusive legends. So the Hayes Health Sheets goes through various health conditions that are often associated with a higher weight and provides like a scientific breakdown from a weight inclusive perspective. So, diabetes, so you can, or sore knees, or PCOS, ovarian stuff. So all the kinds of things which, like, as soon as you get it in mainstream medicine, they're like, right, you have to lose weight. This is a really good resource for you to go to look to for a more kind of like measured assessment.
Yeah. Everything else I like to say to people when you go to a doctor and they say you have to lose weight, you say, yes, and I want to know what treatment you would give to a person who's in a thin BMI normative body. I want that treatment.
I love
right?
that. Yeah,
And that's what you're going to find on those health sheets. So I'll put that in the show notes as well.
absolutely.
Thank you for reminding that. So I'm going to ask a question to close this podcast episode that I'm going to ask to every speaker. What is your outlook on GLP-1 / weight neutral health in 5 and 10 years?
Ooh.
Oh, I know.
Look, everyone's going to be thin and healthy, and finally the scourge of obesity is gone forever. No, that's sarcasm. That's me at 6 a.m. Very sorry. I think
Your personality is shining through here.
I think in 5 years we're going to have a much, well, actually in 5 years, some of the patents will be off. So yeah, gloves will be off. We're going to see drugs being cheaper, right? But that doesn't mean that the big ones, the big players, aren't already like trying to get people back to birth weight. There's a race. So we will have things getting cheaper, but we will also have in 5 years, I think, even more lawsuits, even more deaths, much better idea of side effects, kind of undeniable evidence that they're so desperately kind of suppressing. So we're going to have a much better clinical picture of like the actual impacts, because the longer you use these, the more profound the the issues become. So we're going to see nutritional deficiencies, we're going to see a lot of muscle mass loss, we're going to see bone density loss, more falls in older people. So I think we're going to have a lot more information, right, that we don't have now. But here's the thing, I reckon in 10 years, and this is what kind of keeps me a little bit weirdly optimistic, because although we're living in this avalanche of like, look how great weight loss drugs are, I'm actually seeing more and more evidence for weight inclusive care. It's really, really encouraging. Every single paper that has been released about a GLP-1, and look, I think GLP-1s are fascinating mechanisms, really incredibly interesting for diabetes, all kinds of, like the actual direct health impact is a breakthrough, is, effective. But what we're seeing is that the impact of health improvement is completely unrelated to weight change. So what I think we'll see in 10 years is the much more refined use of GLP-1s without the side salad of like weight loss. So I think it'll inadvertently undermine weight focused care, because they're like, actually, we are seeing that health can be improved without any change in weight, and we can find a minimal dose that people will be much better able to tolerate side effects on. So we'll get health impacts and people's weight doesn't have to change. And that's a really good outcome, because we have been screaming from the rooftops about things like weight cycling and the impact of that. We've been talking about like genetic predispositions, like some people are just bigger and, aren't going to be like magically different if they're shrunk, So my hope, and I think I haven't seen anything to kind of undermine it. It's actually I was just reading yesterday about liver improvements on GLP-1s being completely unrelated to weight change. And that comes on top of the one I read last week about kidneys and how that's unrelated to weight change. And even back to $1 Million Donna and her press release about Wegovy being so good for cardiovascular risk, and it's all related to weight. I did a podcast on that, and she's like, yeah, it's all to do with weight. And then in the same presentation, she's like, of course, we don't actually know that yet, but I'm sure that's going to come out.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years ago, buried in a journal that didn't get a press release, is the study that says, yeah, that actually, like, even people that gained weight got that benefit. So, I think we'll hopefully in 10 years be using them for their benefits, and there'll be a much stronger case for weight inclusive medicine. And I just really hope that the casualties, that's the bit that worries me, is, the thousands of lawsuits with people with gastroparesis, people with, blindness. There's a really interesting case that's happening here in Australia with a grandmother who suffered from depression for like 25 years, started taking weight loss drugs, and just out of the blue one day stabbed her daughter-in-law and her 8-year-old grandson. And she says, it just came out of nowhere. I don't know why I did it. So that really worries me, that the human cost of this. So it's complicated.
We don't want another Fen episode, but we may be going in that direction where we have another big scandal in the same level that Fen was in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, it was, Fen was like late 90s, but Steph, we're already there. This is,
it's not known as a scandal yet.
No.
As publicly.
No, because the only difference, Fen was taken off after, I think, a couple of hundred deaths. We've had like 1,000 deaths from semaglutide alone, 750 from tirzepatide, even though it's only been out for a little while. There's more than 3,000 people in the multi-district lawsuit against Novo Nordisk for mostly gastroparesis and pancreatitis and bowel obstructions. So what the difference between Fen and now, like there is a scandal, but because of the very effective Novo Nordisk marketing about like the risk is worth it because obesity is such a disease, we have a better appetite, for risk.
Oh,
It's terrible.
that's a very interesting perspective. So what you're saying is that the business plan and the marketing plan was so effective for GLP-1 versus Fensan 25 years ago, and they're able to bury the scandal now. They learned from the mistake of Fensan.
Yeah, that the playbook has been refined. Like that, in order to tolerate more side effects, we need to convince people that the disease is so bad that we can tolerate a few more deaths. Like the death rate is unacceptable. It is a scandal. It's just that no one cares.
It's just not named a scandal publicly.
Yeah, yeah, all worth
It's
it,
still named as a miracle drug today.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
this is how far we've got with reducing weight stigma.
That was a phenomenal interview. Tell me more about how people can find you in your world, Louise.
Yes. Oh, okay. I'm so deep in various rabbit holes of writing, but I'm still alive, everyone. So probably my newsletter is the easiest way to find me at the moment on untrapped.com.au. You can kind of scroll down and then join my newsletter there. I've got the All Fired Up podcast, and that has ironically not been fired up in a little while, but I am just about to release some new episodes on All Fired Up, and those are going to be all about how the childhood weight loss research world has been kind of co-opted by Novo and, kind of editing eating disorder risk. So that's going to be really interesting. I'm still alive. I still have a heartbeat. So find me on the podcast, find me on the newsletter. And there's some really exciting things coming up, kind of along the lines of this Novo Nordisk stuff in later this year. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. You're doing some very important work for all of us, because nobody else would be putting this work together on the scale that you, Reagan, are doing for the world to know. So thank you very much for your dedication to this work.
Thank you for you putting this out there. It's fantastic.
Thank you. And we'll see you on the Fired Up podcast.
Yes.
Want to coach behaviors, not bodies? Learn the mindset tool and the method that create real changes? Join the waitlist for the next cohort of the non-diet coaching certification at stephaniedodier.com/waitlist. That's where the real training begins. And I'll see you on the other side, my sisters.